Hello and welcome back. Today I'm going to present a quick overview of some of the cards I included to upgrade the Divine Convocation deck from March of the Machines. Kasla is going to be our commander for this video. The areas I'm going to cover are the mana base, ramp, adding or changing Convoke spells, adding token makers, removal and protection, and my design's current win conditions. I will largely only be going over cards I add to the deck, also mentioning some I kept, but if you want to check out the full deck list, there'll be a link in the description below. In the description below, you can also find my article on Flipside Gaming, not a sponsor of this channel. Read that if you want a more in-depth discussion about my selections. First up, we have the mana base. The Precon decks are notorious for their lackluster mana bases, and unfortunately this one is singing the same song. When I design 3-color decks, I usually add 3 or 4 of a cycle of lands to easily bring the mana base up to par. I considered the Shock, Bond, Slow, Check, and Pain lands along with the Snow Duel lands for the deck, and I ended up using the Shock, Slow, and Pain lands. I really like the Snow Duel lands because, like the Shocks or the Triome, they have the land types in them, so if you keep Keeper of the Accord in the deck, it can go and fetch those for you to help fix your mana. Otherwise, they do come into play tapped, but I still like them. Other lands I include were the castles Ardenvale and Embereth, since one makes a token and the other one pumps my creatures. I also had Reliquary Tower, which isn't always useful, but in testing, it worked out well when I needed it, so if you don't need it, it's an easy cut, but I like it. Otherwise, I add Rogan Triome for more color fixing, and it has the land types, so always good to have. Over to our Ramping Rocks. The package for this deck is pretty standard for the colors. I forewent any Plains land type fetching cards and only add mana rocks like the Talismans. I kept Soul Ring in the deck because we do have a 6-drop commander. Even with Convoke, we might want that extra Soul Ring. Migratory Route for land cycling because it only needs 2 colors or 2 of any color, and that's always great if you don't have the colors you need otherwise. It also gives us tokens, which is also great. And I also kept Wand of the World Soul because it gives our spells Convoke, and that's great in this deck, but also taps for white mana, so it's a shoo-in. I also add Flywheel Racer as an include to up the vehicle count a little bit so I can tap down tokens when I need to, because Crew says power X or more. So with some of the effects in the deck, I can tap all the creatures I want and still get the effect. It also provides mana when you tap it once it's a creature, so it can help us kinda get a semi-convoke privilege out of one of our cards to cast a spell. To the Convoke spells, the deck unfortunately only comes with about 16, and I don't remember if that includes the commander or not. My final deck design contains 21 outside of the commander. It includes Benny Brack Zoologist for card draw, Conclave Phalanx for some life gain, Interdisciplinary Mascot for a little bit more card selection, and City of Fire to help you get over the top. I also add Referee Squad for some extra control and because I think it's hilarious, and Cover Concealment to protect my board state. Since I'm going to be using a lot of tokens, I don't want them all to die. Speaking of tokens though, we're going to move on to the token makers, and I heavily rearranged some of those in this deck, taking out some mainstays like Kaikar that they work, but in my design they were a little bit more lackluster as things went along, and add others that synergize more with my commander. Alondra Skydreamer gives us a token whenever we draw that second card a turn from either our commander's triggered ability or another source. Athari is a hasty life linking, and life is important in this deck if we're going to be tapping down our defenses. Flyer, so it has evasion and can give us tokens when it attacks. And those tokens keep going up based on the amount of experience counters we have, and it has built-in recursion from those tokens. It's really perfect on its own in here. We have Oveka, the Enigma Goliath, who gives us a large amount of tokens for casting non-creature spells, especially when we do something like Elspeth or Shark Typhoon. Then we get 6 tokens just because reasons, and they get haste until end of turn. Stonybrook Schoolmaster gives us a blue token, a Merfolk, whenever it gets tapped, and we use that for Convoke. Court of Grace gives us evasive tokens whenever we don't or do have the Monarch, so either way we get a flyer, plus it increases our card draw potential, which that's my favorite of the cycle. I love this card. And then the Invasion of Segovia gives us 2 tokens up front and helps us Convoke spells once we flip it over. And we have a lot of flyers that help get over other people's defenses. We just put this on, I don't know, maybe the green player, hit it with our commander, and then we have a legendary creature that helps us Convoke stuff and taps 4 of our creatures. Definitely in the deck. I really went and rearranged the card advantages in this deck to add more card advantage that revolved around tokens coming into play or stuff triggering at certain steps in the turn rather than just getting card draw. Yes, Rhystic Study would be fantastic, but I also wanted to keep the budget for the deck down, so if people want to build out my design, they don't have to feel obligated for Rhystic Study. On that front, we have a Fargov the Polis and Rumor Gatherer, which give us card draw or scrying card draw when creatures come into play that are tokens or just other creatures. Halo Fountain can actually be used for white tap to untap our creatures for a card draw. It also provides tokens and a win condition, so it's a Shurin in here. Shorokai generates a token and gives us some card selection, so it's also very good. It's also a vehicle we can use to crew our tokens if we have to tap them down for some reason. Sphinx of the Second Sun is a large evasive flyer. We get another upkeep step, another draw step. That's all at end of turn, so we just get to untap all of our guys and get a free card out of it. I really like this card in here. A little expensive at 8, but it has worked out really well. And lastly, Staff of the Storyteller has actually been really good in this deck. For 2 mana, it brings in a 1/1 white flying token. It's already like basic creature stats right there. I mean, a little bit behind normal creatures. But then when a token comes into play, it gets a counter, white tap, take the counter off, draw a card. This thing has been amazing. You only get 1 extra card per turn, basically, at least on your turn, but it's still 1 extra card. Removal and protection. I didn't change the removal package too much because a lot of the removal had Convoke, and I need that critical mass of Convoke spells for the deck to work off Kasla. So I did take out the single target removal, Swords to Plowshares, and Wear and Tear for more general removal like Chaos Warp and Generous Gift, just so I can hit more targets. It does increase the mana cost a little bit, but I really wanted to have that flexibility since my removal is only about 8 in the deck, so when I hit it, I want to be sure to kill whatever I need killing. For mass removal, I took out Hour of Reckoning. Every time I played it, it felt really bad to try and just wipe everything I worked for except my tokens. This deck is not built around overrunning with my tokens. Hour of Reckoning would be a lot better in Selesnya Convoke. Here I didn't like it as much, so I put in Perplexing Test, which is an instant, which is already better, and gives me more flexibility. With it, I can wipe out a whole board of tokens anyway, and if I'm doing that, I'm probably afraid of what's on the other side of the table. But if not, I can bounce my creatures back, keep my token army, and then reconvoke, recast, re-ETB my creatures, and get all that goodness back. Of course, your opponents can too, so you want to do it at an opportune time, but it being instant speed adds so much flexibility to that. The other board wipes I kept were Austere Command, which barely made it. It's 6 mana, it's a little bit expensive, it is very flexible, and it really only stayed in because I don't have a lot of enchantment and artifact removal, so if I can find a better thing, I'll probably replace it. I tried Farewell, I tried some other things, I didn't like them as much. And of course I kept Elspeth's Sun's Champion because it does everything the deck kind of wants to do except draw cards, so it's definitely in there. For protecting our board state, we have Boros Charm because of its efficiency, Rootborn Defenses that gives our guys indestructible, plus it generates a new token, and Clever Concealment since it adds Convoke, and I mentioned that card earlier. The deck also comes with Ephemeral Shields, kept that in, it's a Convoke card, only protects one thing, but it does up the Convoke count. I didn't include Teferi's Protection because of how much it costs. It'd probably be very good in here on par with Clever Concealment, considering Clever Concealment you can technically at some point get for free. But Teferi's Protection also protects you from spells and your life total changing. If you have it, great. If you don't have it, don't worry about it. It's an expensive card. So how do we win? So our first win condition is just through combat. We have a lot of large evasive creatures. We have a lot of evasive tokens. Pecking people down throughout the game, getting that life total down, is one of our mainstays as far as winning goes. Our second win condition is burning or draining our opponents. 3 of our cards that we use for this are Impact Tremors, Witty Rope Master, and Throne of the Godpharaoh, and they all help in this regard. The first 2, tokens come into play, creatures come into play, burn every opponent. Throne of the Godpharaoh drains at the end of our turn based on how many tapped creatures we have, which can be a lot depending on what we get to the battlefield, but even if you're doing like 2-3 a turn, it starts to add up pretty quick. Now again, for cost considerations, I didn't add Pulveros, God of the Forge in the deck design that I did, but it is a fantastic card in here. If you have it, go ahead and put that in. It's an indestructible, hard to kill, eventually creature. It pumps your board state, it burns your opponents, it does everything this deck would want to do as far as getting the game moving. Another card I want to highlight in this section in particular is Wildfire Awakener, a new card that comes with the deck. I spent a lot of time trying to work in combos and things, but trying to tutor out combos that I had in mind for this deck just wasn't working out, and waiting to draw the cards was just painful. So with this card, if you have infinite mana or infinite creatures, it obviously will make infinite creatures on its own. But what we can do in this deck is tap enough creatures to get a sizable chunk of the elementals it brings to play, and each of those elementals has, whenever this becomes tapped, deal 1 damage to target opponent. Now I also didn't include a lot of untappers in the deck. We have Halo Fountain and Sphinx of the Second Sun. I did want to add like Drum Bellower and Reconnaissance, but it ended up being less combat oriented, so I didn't feel like they were necessary for the deck design. But if you want to depend on stuff like these effects or more tap down creatures, of which there aren't too many, then you can add those in. But basically what happens is we get the tokens, they don't necessarily need haste. If we have a vehicle, we just tap them all, deal damage to our opponents, maybe throw out the Godfrail, lops off another 5 life from everybody. There's some synergy going on there that can be really, really good. I also didn't add Jeskai Ascendancy. I didn't feel like it was worth it in this particular deck, as a lot of the spells that I would cast are a little bit expensive, and I felt like if I couldn't cast a couple spells a turn, I wasn't really getting like value out of the card. But if you can make it work in your deck, I would also add that too. It gives you card selection, pumps the tokens, you get combat, potentially the burn from those tokens, everything's good. Our last win condition is activating the last ability of the Halo Fountain to simply win the game. In a deck like this, as it's built right now, we can get to 15 tokens or creatures total, but it might take a little bit, and Halo Fountain's going to be like, hey, look at me, I can possibly win the game for this player. It'll probably get destroyed. Maybe. But the deck certainly can get there. I haven't been able to activate it yet in testing because when I was goldfishing it, instead of playing it against people, I got to the 15 tokens, but people interact with you and things happen. However, we don't necessarily want to take it out. It provides a bunch of other benefits. Plus, if we need to tap down our creatures and we can't attack or something, again, the vehicles come in handy there. Just crew the vehicle with everything, pay the 5 white mana, untap your guys and win the game. Flywheel with Racer is specifically good because it can also tap to gain one of those white mana, and a 3-card deck, that's going to be a little bit hard. The deck does lean heavily white, but that's not a guarantee. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this quick overview. Hopefully I didn't take up too much of your time. I was aiming for a certain length here, but we'll see how it goes. I am out of practice, as I'm sure most of you know. If you want to check out the full deck list, there's a link in the description below, both to Moxfield and to Tappedout, whichever you prefer. I do prefer Tappedout, but I'm trying to be cool and use Moxfield, but it's really confusing. I like my graphs, that's all I can say about that. Anyway, today is release day. I hope you have excellent games at the shop for release. I hope you have excellent Commander games with your friends and family. And of course, I hope your booster pulls are the most epic ever. See you all next time.